I make no apology for returning to basic editing here, because it's the core of what we need to do. We're going to need these basic edits in many of our images, irrespective of what software we're using. Take this image as an example. If I expose for the foreground, the sky would likely be too bright. If I exposed for the sky, then the foreground is likely to be too dark. So I suppose we could say that this exposure is a compromise between the two, which many of our exposures are, and it requires image editing to balance that exposure. Now, some of the edits which we've dealt with in previous videos include the optics, which I've already done, cropping and straightening, which I've also done, but it's pretty obvious where we need to start here. So let's begin with the highlights. I'm going to drop them right down to the left, and with the shadows I'm going to move them up until I feel the image looks about right. If I took this slider to the extreme, you can see it looks a little bit unnatural now. So I'm going to drag it back to where I think it's about right. But now I want to increase the contrast a little bit. So starting with the whites and blacks, I'm going to move the white slider to the right. Now you can see I've got a lot of latitude here before I start to lose detail, looking at that little highlight warning at the top right. So I'm going to stop around about there. Less latitude on the blacks, but although that little white light that's lighting up top left is a guide, we don't have to follow it blindly. So we need to look at what we're seeing in the image. Then I'm going to go down to vibrance. I'm going to give it quite a bit of that. After all, it's an evening shot. But now I'm doing that, I'm starting to look at the colour balance, because now I can see that the colour of the sea in the middle distance is blue. Now when the surf rolls over, the surf is not blue. So I'm going to pick up my white balance and give that a click. That's miles better. Now I'm going to go down to my effects, and one of the other options I use most of the time is a nice, if I can say it, nice healthy slug of clarity. Now I want to go back and just do a little couple of tweaks with the exposure maybe, but we've got an image that's complete. Now the length of my video so far is still under 3 minutes, and we've talked through the entire process. I've got a couple of distractions on the left middle. You can see a couple of people sitting on a rock, which I'm not too worried about. A couple of people walking by, and of course we know how to clone out distractions. Something else that's nice to do when you've reached this point in a manipulation, remember when we open this, or if we click done down at the bottom right, all of the changes we've made will be retained in the thumbnail. So if we do change our mind tomorrow, we can open this up and pick up from where we left off without any detrimental effects on the image. But if I touch the P key, you can see a before and an after. And I quite often say that editing is a series of small steps, none of which are often great, but when we add 6, 7, 8, 10 of those small steps together, it does add up to be quite significant. One final thing that you may want to think about. Look at the edges of the image, the bottom left corner, bottom right corner. Let's take a look at the vignette here and just move it a little bit to the left. Now if we go to the right, we're going to get that traditional vignette, but that's not what I want here. I just want to darken down the edges a little bit. But I want to do that without it being visible on the screen like that. So we only need a little bit of it. It makes a lot of difference. If I double click this and set it back, you can see the difference it's made. Somewhere around there suits me. And now I could open this up into Photoshop. Now, just before I do actually open this up into Photoshop, let me introduce you to something which is nice to have. It's certainly not essential. Remembering that we can always go back into Bridge and double click the thumbnail and pick up the editing sometime later, If you go to the hyperlink at the bottom center of the Adobe Camera Raw screen and click that, if you go to your workflow, we can tick this little box that says Open in Photoshop as a Smart Object. Now I'm going to do that, and I'm going to open this up, and you'll notice even the button changes to Open Object. I'm going to open this up and I'll show you that this is a nice convenience. Once the image opens up into Photoshop, you'll notice that the thumbnail in the Layers palette looks a little different. There's a symbol on the bottom right corner which in fact is telling us that we've got a smart object here. So I can double click that thumbnail. It'll open up back into Adobe Camera Raw, and if I felt I needed to make some changes, I could do so and then click OK. And I can do that as many times as I wish. When I get to the stage where I no longer need the Smart Object status, if I go to the right of the image, right click, I can choose Rasterize, and we're ready to save the image. I'll see you in the next video.